All right. Good morning, and thanks for coming out. The first talk on the second day is always a little rough in the morning for some folks. I know it was rough for me. I'm a tiny bit jet lagged as well. So we'll see how that goes. I'm going to be talking today about developing a more formal approach to hiring than you may be using and try and persuade you to change your existing process. How much of an existing change that's going to be probably depends on what you're doing today, but hopefully I'll give you some tips at least that you can integrate. So we'll start by looking at why you should consider changing your current process. We'll take a look at what I consider to be a better way, and that's kind of the meat of the talk. And then we'll talk about how to get started for yourself and the fine print. So this would be ways that I have implemented these things and people in other organizations who've been to these talks have implemented them elsewhere. So first, hiring is really, really difficult for everyone across whatever industry, but it's especially difficult for technical positions. And it's because of this. There are more technical positions that are open than there are technical job seekers. So the more you need someone in a specific technical area, the harder a time you're going to have for hiring. Also, if you hire people and it does not go well and you have a mishire, the costs to you of that mishire are very large. So there's the sort of straight up cost of paying the wrong person to do a job for a while until you figure out how to address that problem. There's whatever morale hit your team takes if you have a mishire, your time as a manager spent dealing with that mishire, plus the cost of redoing an entire search can be enormous. So why change? Change is risky. However, with the cost being so high of getting it wrong, it's worth your time to put together a process that's going to let you get it right. You may be currently or have been part of in other organizations a process that's more of a go with your gut approach, and a lot of people really like this. It can feel really like what you're doing is just responding to the candidate. So with a go with your gut approach, you may or may not be hiring to fill open positions. You might just be continually reviewing resumes. How many people here work somewhere where you do sometimes hire someone and say, later we'll figure out what to do with them. This person is too good to miss, basically. A couple of people. I was talking to someone at breakfast yesterday who was like, oh, that's exactly what our organization does. And it doesn't work very well. But at the same time, because you are just continually reviewing, when you come across something that's good, you're like, oh, I need to jump on that. On the other hand, you don't really know what you're going to do with that person, and they may be a great candidate for something, but not actually for you. And again, the cost of mishires is really high. If you're successful with that approach and you feel currently like it is working for you, the downside, among other things, is just that you can't scale that. If what you're doing is going with your gut, how do you have one of your colleagues pick that up when you're too busy to run that hiring process? If you need to do a whole bunch of hiring at once and have multiple people do hiring, how do you scale that? So the approach I'm going to be talking about today lets you scale. The other thing it does is help you improve the diversity of your hires. So another downside to just continually reviewing is that it will tend to confirm whatever implicit biases you may have. And the thing about implicit bias is that you won't know that you're doing that. It's certainly not a malicious thing, but it will compound whatever diversity problems you already have in your organization. So what it boils down to is that it's worth taking the time up front, and it is time consuming to do what I'm going to describe here. It's worth taking that time because it will save you time on the back end. It will save you time spent on mishires, and it will actually save you time in the interview process yourself once you have this process up and running. Plus, you can scale it. So you can help the more junior people on your team get experience with the hiring process, and you can hand it off to other managers. The diversity piece is really important. There's been a lot of different kinds of research looking at different ways that diverse teams are more effective. So this particular study is looking at patent filings, and basically the number of citations they have measures how innovative a patent is. And so this particular study is looking at gender diversity and patents with mixed-sex authors are cited more frequently and hence are more innovative. You can measure it in other ways as well. So this study was looking at racial and ethnic diversity, and then it's a McKinsey study, and it's looking at the bottom line, financial performance. Again, more diverse teams perform better. And if you have a process that supports having a more diverse pool of applicants at the top of the funnel and maintaining that diversity through the entire process, you're going to have better outcomes for your business. So, sure, just keep doing what you're doing. That's cool, but I'm going to say there's a better way. So, you can take these elements, put them together, and pick out the pieces that work for you and your organization. I'm going to suggest a whole bunch of things here. It's kind of a menu of options. There are a few things that I think kind of everyone should do. I will try and highlight those. But I know people have implemented these in a lot of different kinds of organizations. So I know someone who's doing this process in a security organization, and they have a very specific set of requirements. So he took some pieces of this, but not all of them. I know someone who's using it to hire customer service managers at basically a call center. And again, some elements of this make sense. It's not a technical position. Other elements don't. So what I'm going to suggest, high level, is that you have a clear set of written criteria that articulate what it is that's important for you about this search. Ask a consistent set of questions across all your candidates. Have a written, I'm going to suggest a rubric, but some kind of written document that you can share that indicates how you're evaluating those responses to that consistent set of questions. And have a core group of interviewers. So for a given search, you have the same people doing the interview process for every candidate. One thing that we're going to focus on is having a structured interview process. The go with your gut approach is basically an unstructured process. And it can feel really good. So in an unstructured interview, maybe you're starting with the resume and you're just asking questions based on what's on the resume, and then the candidate responds, and you respond to that and ask them follow-up questions, and it just feels like it has a really good flow. And it also feels good because you feel like you can dive deep with a candidate. However, even though people love doing interviews this way, it's actually really ineffective. So I'm going to suggest that instead, we use a structured process. And so hopefully now you're saying, okay, this all sounds good. Yes, thank you. We will change. How do we get started? So first, you're going to figure out what's most important. This is laying the foundation for everything else that I'm going to talk about. Based on that, you're going to write an internal job description that you circulate to your team and anyone else that you think might help with recruiting. Then you're going to write the external posting. This is the document for sharing with the candidate. Finally, you're going to draft questions based on that foundational stuff over on the left and put together your rubric for evaluating those things at every stage of the process. You'll take those materials. You'll do what I'm calling here a pre-brief with the team, where you make sure that everyone is on the same page who's going to be part of the hiring process. You do your interviews, however many stages you've set up for that. You make your decision, hopefully you make an offer and it's accepted, and then you immediately do basically a post-mortem, and you take what you learned and you apply it to those materials. Particularly if you don't hire all that often, if you wait until you spin up your next search to try and correct anything you did, you won't get that feedback. And one of the things that is really, really difficult about hiring is even if you do it kind of a lot, unless you work for Amazon, you're probably not doing interviewing every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. Your organization just isn't going to be hiring that much, and so it's difficult to learn from what you're doing. This is the best way to do it in a scenario where you're not doing it as frequently. After the person you've hired has started as part of their onboarding, I would suggest that you gather feedback from them about the interview process. You can get amazingly detailed responses from people. They like being included, and they'll be able to tell you, as a candidate, this is what worked for me, this is what didn't, this is what appealed to me about the job posting. again, write that stuff down. You're not going to remember it in 6 months when you're doing another hiring process. So how do you figure out what's important? Here are some things I suggest you think about. First, job outcomes. Just on the basic level, what is this person going to be doing? But also, what time scale do you expect them to accomplish it on? Are you going to be looking for someone who can hit the ground running, or are you going to be able to allow them to have a pretty good build-up where they're learning? What kind of onboarding are they going to get? Are they going to be able to learn to do the things that you need in the future? So I think I have ability to learn on here. I think whatever kind of technical position you're hiring for, this is the key skill. I have never done a search, honestly, where this hasn't been one of my primary characteristics that I'm looking for in a candidate. Because the technical landscape changes so quickly, and honestly, our organizations change so quickly, that if you have someone who's really good at one thing and they're just going to do that over and over and over again, they're not likely to be a good fit for a technical organization. Related to that is future ability. So obviously, you're going to ask them questions about what they've done in the past, but you want to understand what can they do for me in the future, and what am I going to need from this position in the future. This stuff is part of the reason why hiring someone without having a specific opening is so difficult, because you just can't answer these questions. So skills versus specific experience, that's the same type of thing. You want someone who's going to be able to tackle whatever challenges come their way, rather than ticking a bunch of experience boxes. And finally, you want to think through the relative importance of those things. You're going to come up, potentially, if you're working with a number of other people, with like a laundry list of stuff that feels important. So you want to narrow that down to, I would say, 3 to 6 primary characteristics or skills that you think are vital for this specific role. So the question I would have for you is, do you want someone who can launder money? Or if it turns out that that's what you need, they'll figure it out. You want everyone to be on the same page. You're going to be able to communicate with the people who are part of the hiring process more effectively if everyone understands what those core skills are that you're looking for. But you'll also be able to get better recruiting. Because what you're going to want to do is create a document that you circulate internally to help you diversify that pool of candidates and reach as many people as possible. So everyone needs to understand what it is that's core. This can feel a little abstract, and I know this is a wall of text. Here are 2 examples of job postings for the same position. This is the before. It's a junior Linux system administrator role for a Big Ten university. And I don't think it's a terrible posting. There are certainly worse ones out there that if you Google around you can find. But it's not great. There are definitely some issues with it. So first, we've highlighted here that we're using some older technology. Do we really need to hire someone who can admin the few Solaris boxes that we still have when we're trying to retire them? No, probably not. Plus, this job description is for communication with the candidate. And so what does it say to the candidate? Oh, come here. We're going to hire you to work on obsolete technology. Maybe you'll still have a job when we finally get around to retiring it, and maybe you won't. None of that is enticing. Plus, look, we've got preferred qualifications that are all of our soft skills. The required qualifications are the hard skills. So what message does that send to the candidate? Being a team player here is optional? Like, yikes, right? That's not what we're looking for. So this is the after. I'm not going to claim this is some kind of amazing, earth-shattering, wonderful job description either, because I don't think it is. But here's what we improved. We simplified the required experience. So if you go back here, we were requiring all this, a very specific bachelor's degree. Again, this is a junior Linux system administration position. And we had this specific experience with Solaris. We had specific things around which scripting languages. Here it's much more open. What I'm looking for is I've highlighted the soft skills that I determined were important working with my hiring committee. And we've added a line about promoting diversity in the workplace. Just adding that is more welcoming to candidates. This is a place where a lot of bias can creep in without your realizing it. There are good internet tools that some of them are free even that you can run a job posting through and get red flags for certain things. What it won't do is tell you positive things. So like putting in this thing is something that is worth doing if you do in fact support diversity in the workplace and that's important to you. So the tools won't tell you to do that, but it will tell you if there are some red flags that you missed in your read through. So I have a resources slide at the end that lists a couple, but of course you can just Google it as well. We've highlighted collaboration, that we want to have someone who can tackle new projects and opportunities. We worked really hard to make this focused on a growth mindset. So this is the ability to learn new things. There are two reasons for doing that. So one is that really is genuinely important to me and I think is a key skill, particularly for a junior job, but honestly for anything I hire for. Also, though, there's good research about growth mindset language in job postings, and one study found that they fill 11 times faster than job postings that have fixed mindset language in their job descriptions. So again, this piece is for communication with the candidate. You want to put yourself in their shoes and think about what's going to be meaningful to them. And for anyone that's going to be worth your time hiring, they're going to be interested in learning and growing, and you want to highlight that in your job posting. To sum up the research, pretty much you'll have a more diverse applicant pool, you'll have more applicants, the simpler it is. You streamline things, take out a lot of the language that's not necessary, really focus on the top things from your priority list that are important to you. More people will apply. So I kind of foreshadowed this earlier. We should focus on behavioral style interview questions as opposed to just an unstructured interview that asks open-ended hypotheticals. So you have this list of key skills now and abilities. As the process, as you write your job posting and your job description, this helps clarify how to get at those things that are important to you, and then you start drafting these questions. So how many people are familiar with what behavioral style interview questions are? A couple? Okay, so a behavioral style question is basically, tell me about a time when. It takes it out of the hypothetical realm and gives you a chance to come up with questions that will allow you to differentiate between candidates. Part of your goal with writing these questions is that you're not going to be getting the same types of answers across most of your candidate pool. Any question that doesn't help you differentiate between candidates is basically a waste of your time. Because in the end, you need to make a decision and settle on just one person. So let's make it more concrete again. Here's an example. A typical question might be, tell me about a time when you had difficulty with a manager. What happened? So a couple things about that question. First, it is open-ended in that I didn't say, tell me about a time you had trouble with a manager. How did you resolve it? The distinction is that you've left it up to the candidate how positive they want to spin whatever that interaction was. And the thing is, you might think to yourself, okay, so this person is in a job interview situation. They're going to give me something that puts them in a good light because they're interviewing for a job. But honestly, my experience has been no. If you leave things open-ended, you're going to learn a lot about that person's communication style that you do not learn if you have a more closed question, like how did you resolve it? People are incredibly revealing. So the other thing you want to do is ask something that speaks to those specific requirements that you had, that you identified as important. So again, you want to use these questions to differentiate between candidates. I'll get to the rubric slide in just a minute, how we're making those evaluations. But as you write the questions, think through how they relate to the characteristics that are important for you. So which of those characteristics are you evaluating with each question? Think through what part of your filter, if you think about hiring as a big funnel, right? People come in at the top, and then each stage you eliminate more candidates. At what stage do you want to eliminate people with those specific questions? You're using them to differentiate between candidates, so how does your question meet those needs? Finally, avoid questions that don't point to any specific scenario. You may need to redirect candidates. Not everyone is familiar with behavioral style interviewing, so you might need to say, okay, so that's generally how you'd resolve conflict. Can you give an example of a specific time, maybe at your last job, where you had a conflict with your manager? What happened? And so when I ask that kind of probing question, what I'm looking for is something about, do they have some ability to push back to a manager? I want to have a relationship with the people who report to me where they're comfortable pushing back, but I also want to have people who are able and willing to push back. So that's one of the specific things I'm looking for. And I don't get that if I ask a generic, how do you handle conflict in the workplace question. Everyone's answer is kind of the same for that. That's the thing people rehearse. So another thing that I would suggest you do is have some kind of work sample. So I unfortunately was not able to attend the Improving Technical Interviews talk yesterday, but I'm hopeful that it addressed this very question. Some kind of work sample is going to be valuable because that is addressing the specific thing the person is actually going to be doing for you. I really like, for technical interviews, code reviews. I don't know if they talked. Did anyone go to that talk? Did they talk about code reviews as part of the interview process? Okay. I love that. I think it is one of the more time-consuming things to set up, but it tells you a lot, if you're hiring for a developer, it tells you a lot about how they're going to interact with the team while also letting you evaluate their technical skills. And those two things need to go hand in hand. Having someone who's a brilliant genius who can't work with anyone is not actually likely to be very successful in your environment. I also, this next example is the kind of case study that I've used for system administration questions. There are websites you can send people to where they have to do a challenge for a sysadmin position like you would for a coding challenge. I don't think that they're very useful. I think it's better to just ask people about what they would do in a specific situation. This is a hypothetical, ultimately. We're asking it, though, because it makes them walk through a specific scenario. So this is an example of a rubric. It's an abbreviated rubric from the very top of my funnel. So what I have done in the past is I actually send a pre-screener to everyone who applies. I don't look at the resumes. I don't try and limit in any way who gets this. So I've done this with searches of up to 145 candidates. And usually it's about 5 questions. This is just an excerpt from one. And the candidate gets the set of questions. Usually I send it out on a Thursday morning and request responses by Tuesday evening. And so that gives them some weekdays, some weekday evenings, and a weekend. If there are any issues with that, I just give them more time, basically. It's not a time-dependent thing. And generally, I've found that people spend about 30 to 45 minutes on it. We tell people to spend less than 2 hours on it. The way I've run this in the past, you can tell how long people spend on it. And some people, I'm assuming, just had it open in a browser tab for a long time, because the average time will sometimes be like 2.5 days. And I don't think that's accurate. So this first one, again, junior system administration position. What we're looking for here is highlighted in bold. So that's the action-oriented and communication. These are two of the things we're trying to evaluate for at the top of our funnel. This case study is pretty basic, and notice if you look at the rubric, so none of that is about correctly answering anything. They need to have a structured approach to how they're going to do it, but I assume whether or not they know how to troubleshoot a down web server, I can teach them that. But I do want someone whose first impulse is not going to just be, well, I'll file a ticket for that and then back slowly away. That's not what I'm looking for in a candidate. I want someone who's going to tell the appropriate people and take some steps to gather information and describe the problem, even if all they do with that information is pass it along to someone who actually knows how to solve it. And again, people will be totally honest, and they will say, I don't know exactly how I would do this. We don't explicitly tell them that they can use the internet, but we also don't tell them don't Google these things. So some people clearly have, but then they tend to have correct technical answers and not answers that really hit the boxes here of what I'm looking for. This second one is just a straight up behavioral style, and usually I do a mix. There'll be 2 technical questions and 3 behavioral style is what I aim for in these screeners. So this one, situational adaptability, nimble learning, I'm looking for someone who, when presented with something that's outside the scope of what they normally do, expresses some enthusiasm for it. And people, again, are incredibly honest. I get answers to this that are like, I would report them to my supervisor. And answers that are like, I would tell them I don't know the answer. Okay? I mean, that's communication, but it's not what I'm looking for. And the hiring committee will sit down. Usually I try and have between 3 and 5 people. I like to keep it smaller, but for a variety of reasons, sometimes that's not possible. We will score all of the responses. The responses are anonymized and scrambled. So as you score them, first you're scoring all of question 1 and then all of question 2, whether it's 18 candidates or 140. You see the numbers at the top. I like a -101 scale, but that's just me. It doesn't really matter how you do that part. Having the numbers means that if you do have 140 candidates, it's very easy to evaluate which are the ones you need to spend more time with. But when you do the evaluation, you do all of one answer and then all of the next. You don't see who gave which answers. You can't tell that this answer 1 went with this answer 2. And everybody does this separately. After people have submitted their answers, they then can see, well, after everyone has submitted their answers, they then can see what the totals are for the individual candidates we de-anonymize, and they can see the resumes for those folks. So we've not looked at resumes. No one has spent time reviewing 140 resumes. They did have to spend time scoring 140 times 5 answers. It's pretty fast. One of the things about having a rubric is that it makes it much easier to evaluate. So the search that I did that had, I think, 145, I blocked out 2 mornings and spent all of both of those mornings scoring, but then I was done. My experience has been that people, the results from this tend to clump, and you will have between, I would say, roughly 5% will be clearly at the top of that score. And again, we've got a numeric score on this. And so you take those candidates, you look at their resumes, you say, are these people that I want to bring in for in-person interview or whatever your next step is. For a big search, we've done a phone screen after this screen. I don't necessarily do that for a small search. This is another sample rubric, but this one is from the in-person interview. And some things about this, you can see I've got the person's name who was going to be asking this question. This was a 3-person interview panel, and so that's just to keep it neat for us. There's the question, ensures accountability is the thing that we're evaluating for. It's right at the top. We have the description of, again, below meets and exceeds expectations. There's no numeric scoring here. This is a finalist interview, and by the time you've gotten to this stage, the conversation I want us to have as a hiring committee is based on the rubric, so it's not just, oh, we all liked candidate A better, and so we're hiring them. But I don't want people to get hung up on quibbling over this candidate had 17 points and this candidate had 18 points, and so we need to hire the candidate who had 18 points. I do want to have a conversation that's like, this candidate who had 1 fewer point, yeah, they had this one question that they didn't answer well, but here's why, and this is where it falls on the rubric. All their other answers exceeded expectations. So it all comes back to having this consistent evaluation method. this is just a document that I would suggest putting together to share with your committee, but also as you are preparing these documents to make sure that you're evaluating pretty thoroughly for all the things that were important. So this is actually kind of a hypothetical one, but it has the different stages of the process and which of those areas are being evaluated by each stage. So putting all that together. Hiring committee, same for all candidates, representing different perspectives. So for me, I've run a lot of infrastructure teams, and we have groups across the institution that we serve that are our internal customers. I like to have at least one representative from those groups on my committee. I like to have people who have different lengths of tenure with the organization, so someone who's new, someone who's been there for a long time. I myself typically bring some representational diversity because I'm often the only woman on these committees. I like to have other kinds of diversity. It's valuable to have people who have different disciplines, so not all technical people on the committee. But again, you're only going to have a few folks, and you don't want to rely on the same people over and over for your committees. It's good for a variety of reasons, including developing your team to spread it around. So then I do, for the big positions, when I worked at the university where we had usually over 100 candidates for every search, HR would do a basic screen. So if someone didn't have any technical work experience, they would get screened out. It was pretty much the only criteria I used. But I would say that that's optional, and I haven't used it since I had that job. The screener questions, which I described, the answers get anonymized, and then there's a rubric to evaluate them. I do, at that point, review the resumes. It means that I'm not spending hours and hours with resumes. Interviews with the consistent questions in the rubric. And then at the end, I sit down with the committee. We do a postmortem. I have a form that I use that I ask people to fill out ahead of time because that's the kind of person I am, but however you want to do it. In a nutshell, have those written criteria. Have a consistent set of questions that you ask across all of your candidates. Have a written method, I would suggest a rubric, for evaluating those responses consistently, and have a core group of interviewers. Thank you, and good luck. And there's the resources slide. I'll try and find a way to share this. I think there's a channel in Slack.